When the first shell hit and the snow leapt up like a living thing, I heard a man scream through cracked lips and realized it was my own voice. And in that stunned second between cold and fear, I tightened my grip on the M1. Because if I didn't move, another man would die, and I'd never forgive myself for choosing warmth over duty in Bastogne in the winter of '44, when even prayers froze in the air. But there was still something I didn't know. We'd been cut off for days, our breath hanging like failed promises while the pines kept their secrets. And the guys called me Doc because my hands were steady and I listened when fear got loud. Miller slept to my right with a photo of his sister tucked under his helmet liner, and Carter, our soft-spoken radio man from Pittsburgh, kept a little German hidden under his tongue like a guilty coin. The lieutenant walked the line with a father's worry and a sergeant's temper, telling us to hold because there was nowhere else to go. And we did hold. Not because we felt immortal, but because nothing else made sense. At dusk, I found Carter alone with the set, whispering to Static the way a kid talks to a locked door. And when he realized I was there, he flinched, then smiled with a glued-on calm and said the line was dead. For now. The way he said it made me wonder what alive would sound like, and why he seemed to be waiting for it with the patience of a man who expected a ghost to knock. We ate crackers we didn't deserve, warmed our hands over a pretend fire hidden under a poncho, and counted minutes with teeth that wouldn't stop chattering. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. The knock wasn't wood, but static turning into words. A voice shaped by miles that said, relief was moving. Hold fast, hold fast, hold fast. It felt like a hand on the back of the neck steadying, and the lieutenant leaned in like a thirsty man at a well. Then the shells returned. Petty, personal, and we flattened against earth that didn't owe us anything. When it eased, Miller swore he'd seen a figure near the wire, low and careful, and I didn't tell him I'd seen it too because saying it out loud would make it heavier. I asked Carter if he'd glimpsed anything, and he shook his head too quickly, then added a barely audible, maybe, and I cataloged that word because in the Bulge you survive by noticing little things. We needed to check the wire, so the lieutenant sent me, Miller, and Carter, 3 men with just enough stubborn hope to pass for courage, into trees that breathed frost. We moved like we'd practiced in heat back in a world that no longer existed, and the snow squeaked under us like a bad joke. The tracks were there, the body print was there, and a hush fell so complete my own heartbeat sounded improper, in the glint in Miller's eyes. Carter lifted his head and whispered in German, not the rough swear words the guys sometimes swapped, but a smooth, almost tender dialect that made the hairs on my arms stand up. An answer came from the dark, a whisper like a thin wire pulled tight, and in that quick recoil in Carter's shoulders I understood there was a history here I hadn't signed for. He told us, in English now, that the man ahead might be trying to desert, that he had maps, timings, and the kind of truths men send to save themselves. How do you know? Miller hissed, and the answer landed like a confession tossed down a stairwell. He's my father's cousin, Carter said. Dieter Brown, SS. He used a phrase only my grandmother would recognize through the net days ago. My throat went dry because you don't expect your war to meet you at the family table. Not like that. And yet, here we were. I should have shouted for the lieutenant, but something in me wanted to see if Mercy could be saved from the wreck, too. We made a plan to meet at the broken farmhouse to the east, under the roofline shaped like a sigh. We'd cover from the shadows, and Carter would talk family to family while I tried to swallow my doubt. But there was something she didn't know yet. We were halfway to the farmhouse when headlights crashed through the dark. Indifferent, blunt, and instinct scattered the fragile trust we'd built. An armored car braked hard, boots hammered snow, and I heard an accent I wanted to weep for, American, followed by our lieutenant's bark. The patrol dragged us back with all the righteous fury of men who'd found their stray sheep, and in the confusion, a tall shape peeled off from the trees and vanished like a rumor that would not be proven. Carter said nothing. Too stiff, too careful, and I said nothing because I didn't know how to stitch loyalty and suspicion together into words. Back in the hole, the lieutenant read us the riot act, then checked our hands for tremors and our eyes for cracks like the decent man he was, and he told me quietly, "Keep your boy close." I promised I would, and when the sky finally crept toward morning, steel groaned along distant roads, and someone swore Patton's Third Army was punching through ice like a boxer through bad news. At that moment, when an announcement came over the radio, her life would change. By midday, a staff car idled near a crossroads, and for a heartbeat, through snow that made the world look like a theater, a bulldog face under a brim glanced our way, and a gloved hand cut the air as if impatience could part clouds. Some men say Patton could cuss the weather into submission. All I know is our hearts realigned to the possibility of rescue, and yet as power returned to our voices and fingers, I saw Carter drift toward the tree line like iron drawn to a magnet, and there, just beyond the white breath of a pine, a figure waited with a white band on his arm. I moved, Miller moved, the angle of a triangle closing, and Carter reached the man first. I felt hope sharpen. Maybe we'd end a small war right here, with a handshake across poison. And the universe, offended by our audacity, answered with a descending whistle. The blast pitched us into trees and silence. When sound returned, it came back as ringing metal, then Miller's voice ripping the air with my name. We crawled to Carter. His coat was open, his blood insisting on a red the snow had never seen. Beyond him, a darker stain and a deeper stillness. A man, or just the war's shadow, we couldn't tell. Carter's eyes found mine. A boy's lanterns in a frozen cave, and he whispered, "Ask them something normal so I can picture it. Ask where they're watching from. One quick thing, where are you watching this from right now? A kitchen, a train, a quiet room. Drop it in the comments with one word so he can picture you." The radio coughed alive again and promised a corridor, an hour of grace, resupply if the road held. Those words changed men's postures. Spines lifted, shoulders reset. I told Carter to hold on, told him he'd see clean sheets and a soft-voiced nurse. His mouth quirked. He knew a story when he heard one, and he used the breath I couldn't spare to ask, "Braun?" I hesitated, then said, "Almost," because that felt like the truest word left. We got a stretcher under him. He gripped my sleeve, surprising strength in a leaking body, and whispered, "Tell my grandmother I remembered the phrase." And then the light inside him dipped. I kept my voice steady because that's what you do for a man in the doorframe between two rooms. We moved, the body mule stubborn, grief mule stubborn, and even the frost patterns on a strap looked cruel because of how precisely they were carved by cold. The aid station swallowed him, and I told the lieutenant everything because secrecy had curdled into guilt. He listened like a judge who wanted to acquit, then said, "If a man tried to walk maps out of hell, I hope he got 3 steps." And I carried that line like a coin I couldn't spend. Relief rolled in jagged, imperfect lines. Tanks stitched us back onto the map with tracks that sang a metallic hymn. The radio chatter turned almost playful, like a river remembering how to run. Rumors floated through the ranks. A German officer had slipped with documents into our net somewhere north, guided by the echo of a family phrase. A Belgian woman with flour on her sleeves told our squad that a tall man with a white band had been seen walking with his hands up near a shed whose roof was new. "The maps," she said. "The maps made it." That was the hinge. We had no report with a ribboned bow, no body we could lift and say, "Him," but hope sometimes prefers smoke over stone. Miller kept the photo of his sister closer and added lines to the letter he could not yet mail. And when he saw me worrying the strip of cloth we'd found near the blast, white with faded blue flowers, he slipped it into his pocket with a nod like a vow. The lieutenant ordered us to hold a crossroads that felt like the world's ligature, and we did, because holding was the only language we truly knew. 2 weeks later, after the maps had become movements and the sky had decided we could breathe, we were sent to clear a farmhouse our paperwork had forgotten. Danger loves to wear innocence, and the place looked like a postcard. We moved by the book you write in warm classrooms. The first shot came from the loft and found Jones. The second came for me. Miller, with a reflex born of friendship more than training, threw his body into the bullet's path and folded into my arms like a door blown inward. I dragged him behind a wall, hands already pressing, words already lying in the only useful way lies can be used. "Tell me something true," he managed, and my mind darted like a trapped bird. I pulled the blue-flowered strip from my pocket and pressed it into his palm and told him, honestly, that sometimes, if the wind behaved, it smelled like my grandmother's soap. He smiled as if he could see a kitchen instead of a loft, as if he could hear a bell instead of gunfire, and asked me to finish his letter to his sister. I wrote, hunched over my knee, spelling mercy with a shaking hand. The shooter was a kid. We should have been teaching to climb trees, not clearing from them. We walked Miller out on the stretcher, and the snow, insulted by all this blood, went on being pretty anyway. We buried one more good man in a world that had no right to keep taking. And the chaplain said a prayer with holes that still managed to hold off the wind. Back at the line, the mail clerk handed me a sack that felt like a future. There was a letter from my mother written in a slope I could see before I opened it. I couldn't finish it because the kitchen it conjured was too warm to visit. Men around me were laughing too loudly because relief turns volume knobs unpredictably. I walked to the edge of the trees and listened for snow creak and radio cough, for any sign that mercy was still doing business here. I heard a bell from a town that had lost its steeple but not its heart. I thought of Carter asking for your comments so he could picture you, and I asked again. One word. Where are you watching from? A city, a village, a moving train. Because sometimes the only bridge between winters is another voice saying, here. A week after the farmhouse, our battalion pushed past a crossroads where staff cars pooled like thoughts. I saw the brim again. Maybe it was him, maybe it was just the idea of him, and the gloved hand again cutting air. Whether Patton himself or impatience dressed as hope, it didn't matter. Men need a face to throw their courage at. The lieutenant clapped my shoulder, quick, embarrassed affection, and told me he'd read Miller's finished letter if I could not. I could not. The radio, whose columns once printed only dread, carried a rumor that a cache of German signals had been cracked with help from a packet found near our sector. Civilians' handkerchief cloth used as sash, the clerk read, eyes wide. I did not move my hand to the empty pocket. I thought of Braun walking with his hands up, or not, of mercy arriving late and still worth it, of family branches grafted to barbed wire. I decided that if guilt was a rope, I would use it to pull, not to hang. That night, a small legal fire obeyed the rules while we took turns breaking open our quiet. Someone asked me if I'd do it again, step into that frozen dark to bargain for a life and a map. I said yes, and inside the yes, I heard the quake of fear and the clearer chime of love. The snow thickened, unbothered by our epics. Sometimes I still hear the radio through ordinary static, a Sunday station misfiring into the past. It says in a dozen voices, hold, hold, hold. It says the corridor is open for an hour, and then for another hour if you keep breathing. It says a man named Carter spoke into a storm and made a hole in it big enough to walk through. It says a man named Miller raised his hand without asking for applause. It says the lieutenant learned to measure his anger carefully because the men he loved lived inside it. It says somewhere a cousin laid down his maps like stones across a stream and stepped where the water thinned. It says kitchens matter, bells matter, comments matter, because they are proof of life. If you're warm right now, take one breath for the boys who carried your future in their freezing fingers. If your window shows a street, take a glance for the ones who only ever saw trees and snow. And if you can, leave that one word in the comments so Carter can find you on the line. Sometimes the smallest signal travels farthest, and sometimes that's the only kind that gets through. And when the call came over the radio, a life would change. If this moved you even a little, tap like so it finds the next person who needs it. Drop that one-word comment with where you're watching from so we can picture you in the quiet hours. And subscribe for more stories we carry together until morning.